The Trans-Saharan trade routes: gold, salt, and empire. In the heart of the African continent, stretching across the vast and seemingly endless expanse of the Sahara Desert, lies a tale of wealth, movement, and enduring influence that is seldom told in its fullness. Long before European ships ever brushed Africa's western shores, a complex and highly organized network of trade routes pulsed across the sands of the Sahara. These were the Trans-Saharan trade routes, the lifeblood of pre-colonial Africa's economy and the connective tissue binding the Mediterranean world to sub-Saharan Africa. Through these routes, not only goods were exchanged, but also culture, faith, and the foundations of empire. The story of these trade routes begins with the camel, an animal whose arrival in North Africa around the 3rd century CE revolutionized transportation and commerce. Known as the ship of the desert, the camel was uniquely suited for the brutal environment of the Sahara. Its ability to carry large loads over long distances without needing water made it the perfect vessel for trans-desert travel. With its arrival, what had once been daunting and deadly terrain was transformed into a bustling commercial corridor. Traders could now make the long, arduous journeys between the Maghreb and the Sahel, between the Mediterranean and the goldfields of the West African interior. The commodities that defined these routes were numerous, but two stood above all others in importance: gold and salt. Gold, glimmering and abundant in the regions of Wangara, Bambuk, and later Akan, flowed from the forests and riverbanks of West Africa northward toward the markets of North Africa, the Middle East, and eventually Europe. West African gold helped fuel the economies of far-off cities like Cairo and Constantinople and played a critical role in the Islamic world's monetary system. Meanwhile, salt, extracted from the dry, sun-blasted mines of Tagaza and Taudeni in the Sahara, was shipped south. To the people of the Sahel and forest zones, salt was more than a seasoning, it was a vital preservative and a rare and precious commodity in its own right. The exchange of salt for gold became the defining transaction of the Trans-Saharan trade, establishing an economic equilibrium that lasted for centuries. With these goods came the rise of powerful states and empires that thrived on the wealth generated by their control of the trade. The first great beneficiary was the Ghana Empire, which emerged in the 6th century and dominated the trade until the 13th century. Ghana, known to its people as Wagadu, positioned itself strategically between the Saharan salt mines to the north and the gold-producing regions to the south. It functioned as a gatekeeper and middleman, taxing goods that passed through its territory and enriching its rulers. The King of Ghana maintained a strong army, centralized administration, and diplomatic ties with North African Muslim traders, many of whom lived in separate quarters of the capital. Though the rulers of Ghana were initially not Muslim themselves, they welcomed the faith's legal, commercial, and cultural benefits into their empire. As Ghana declined, the mantle of power shifted to the Mali Empire, founded in the 13th century by Sundiata Keita. Under Mali's rule, the Trans-Saharan trade reached new heights, and its most famous ruler, Mansa Musa, would come to symbolize the wealth and grandeur of the African interior. In 1324, Mansa Musa embarked on a pilgrimage to Mecca that would stun the world. Traveling with an entourage of thousands, including soldiers, officials, and slaves, and carrying vast quantities of gold, he distributed his wealth so freely along the way that he reportedly caused inflation in the cities he passed through. His journey was not only an expression of piety but also a declaration of Mali's importance on the world stage. It placed the empire on medieval maps and captured the attention of chroniclers in distant lands. Under Mansa Musa and his successors, Mali controlled key trade cities such as Timbuktu, Gao, and Djen. These urban centers flourished not just as commercial hubs, but as places of learning, religion, and culture. Timbuktu, in particular, became a symbol of African scholarship, with its mosques, madrasas, and libraries preserving knowledge in thousands of manuscripts. The wealth generated by the trade allowed for the patronage of Islamic scholars and architects, fostering an intellectual climate that rivaled any in the medieval world. Following Mali's decline, the Songhai Empire rose in the 15th century, eventually becoming one of the largest and most sophisticated states in African history. Centered around the Great Bend of the Niger River, Songhai under rulers like Sunni Ali and Askia Muhammad maintained the trade routes and expanded their empire's influence. Askia Muhammad, a devout Muslim, instituted religious reforms, promoted Islamic education, and enhanced the empire's administrative capacity. Timbuktu and Gao remained vital centers of trade and learning under Songhai rule, continuing the traditions established in earlier centuries. But the Trans-Saharan trade was not limited to the western regions of the continent. Further east, the Kanem-Bornu Empire flourished around Lake Chad, connecting the Sahel with North Africa and the Nile Valley. This empire, too, engaged in the movement of goods such as textiles, ivory, and slaves, and played a significant role in the Islamic world. The integration of African states into a broader economic and religious network was not just a matter of convenience, it was a testament to the dynamism and agency of African societies. Far from being isolated or primitive, they were deeply engaged in global systems of trade and knowledge exchange. Islam, carried by Berber and Arab merchants alongside their goods, spread throughout West Africa along these trade routes. While conversion was initially slow and limited to the elite, over time the faith took deeper root, blending with local traditions and customs to produce rich and unique cultural expressions. Cities like Timbuktu, Jen, and Kano became not only commercial centers but also spiritual and educational beacons. The spread of Islam also brought a common legal and linguistic framework, making trade more efficient and contributing to the development of a cosmopolitan identity among West African urbanites. Yet, the prosperity of the Trans-Saharan trade was not without its shadows. Among the commodities traded were human beings. The Trans-Saharan slave trade, though often overshadowed by the later Atlantic slave trade, was a significant aspect of these networks. Enslaved Africans were transported across the desert to serve in the courts, armies, and households of North Africa and the Middle East. This trade inflicted deep and lasting trauma on African societies, contributing to demographic changes, social instability, and cycles of conflict. By the late 15th century, the balance of power began to shift. European navigators, driven by their own ambitions to tap into Africa's wealth, began to establish direct maritime links with West Africa. Portuguese ships reached the Atlantic coast, bypassing the desert routes and undermining the centuries-old commercial networks. Coastal trade centers began to rise in importance, drawing resources and attention away from the interior. Over time, this contributed to the weakening of the great Sahelian empires, as their economic lifelines were slowly redirected toward the ocean. The Trans-Saharan trade did not vanish overnight, but its dominance faded in the face of changing technologies, geopolitics, and the growing appetite of Europe's emerging empires. Still, the legacy of the Trans-Saharan trade lives on. Its cities, though no longer as prominent as they once were, still stand as monuments to a golden age of African commerce and culture. Manuscripts hidden in family libraries in Timbuktu, the remnants of ancient mosques in Jen, the oral histories passed down among griots, these are the echoes of a time when Africa was not on the margins, but at the very center of a global network of exchange. The salt that once crossed the desert in heavy slabs, the gold that enriched empires, the scholars who debated philosophy and law under the Sahelian sun, all of these are threads in the intricate tapestry of African history. To understand the Trans-Saharan trade is to recognize the ingenuity, resilience, and complexity of African civilizations long before the colonial encounter. It is to dismantle the myths of African isolation and cultural stagnation and replace them with a narrative grounded in evidence, in pride, and in historical truth. Africa's story did not begin with the arrival of Europeans. It is a story that stretches back through millennia, woven into the sands of the Sahara, carried on the backs of camels, and written in the gold that once fueled empires. The Trans-Saharan trade routes are not merely a footnote in the annals of history, they are a foundation, a force that shaped a continent and influenced the world.